Thanks, everyone. Yeah, it's great to be back here. For those of you who were in my session earlier this morning, I'm going to maybe make a little bit of repetition of just my introduction, but I'll try to keep it quick. My main talk today is going to be about improving mobile engagement and retention. But yeah, it's great to be back in Korea. I want to say again a big thank you to Roy and the whole Airbridge team for hosting this amazing event and for facilitating it, and to everyone here who's come to this session to hear me talk. Really appreciate it. So in this talk, I'm going to share with you some of the frameworks and approaches that we use at Phiture to help our clients to grow their apps. And I'm going to specifically focus on the levers that can influence engagement and retention. My slides are in both English and Korean, so I'll do my best to show each Korean language slide for at least a few seconds before I move on to the next slide. But I will be explaining in English. I think there's some live translation if you need it. So, a bit about me. I'm Andy Carvell. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living the last 12 years in Berlin, in Germany. I started out as a game developer, creating embedded games for Nokia handsets back in 1999. And I was developing games in the UK for mobile devices for the next approximately 10 years. After studying an MBA at Warwick Business School in the UK, I moved to Berlin and joined SoundCloud, a social music platform to help them grow on mobile. It was at SoundCloud that I learned a lot about data-driven marketing, and also where I met my friend and colleague Moritz. We shared a real passion for data-driven testing and for growing mobile products. Moritz and I set up Phiture, a new kind of digital consultancy/agency, together in 2016. This is the game that I'm probably most well known for. Back in the day, I made a game called Space Impact. It was very popular in the early days of mobile, one of the first arcade games on a mobile phone. Had a lot of fun making it. It was a great exercise in optimization as well. I had to squeeze the entire game into 16 kilobytes, including all the graphics and data. So, very quickly about Phiture. We're a mobile growth consultancy that works with B2C apps to help them develop and execute on a solid mobile growth strategy. We work with some of the leading apps, as well as some exciting new apps with high potential. We work with the data growth and marketing teams, typically within those organizations, to help them become more data-driven about growth and to run growth experiments that drive measurable business impact. We really try to be an extension of our client's team. So these are some of the kind of brands we work with. We're helping them to build personalized, multi-channel, multi-platform user journeys with mobile at the core. So, enough about Phiture. I want to tell you a bit about engagement and retention. This is a framework called the Mobile Growth Stack, which I originally published back in 2014 when I was still at SoundCloud. You can read all about the Mobile Growth Stack at mobilegrowthstack.com or via the blog section of our website at phiture.com. And in today's talk, I'm going to focus on the levers for growth at the engagement and retention layer, which is that one in the middle that I've highlighted in green. Here it is in Korean, by the way. I'll just leave that up for a second in case anyone wants to take a picture. But you can also come and find me at the booth later, and we can give you a high-res copy of the Korean Mobile Growth Stack if you're interested. Wow, there's so many people here. Thank you all for coming to this talk. Right, so let's define what we mean by engagement and retention. Engagement is what users do when they're in the app. What are the actions that they're taking within the product? Engagement is also sometimes measured in terms of how long they spend doing it. In other words, the average session length. Retention, by contrast, is how often they come back to do that thing. In other words, how often they're engaged with the app, how often they're coming back. It's often measured in terms of what percentage of a given cohort of users engages with the app within a given time period. In other words, what percentage of users come back on a specific day, or in a specific week, or a specific month after they installed the app. So, why do so many companies miss retention problems? Well, I think these two charts tell a really interesting story. The chart on the left shows that MAU growth, monthly active user growth, is looking really healthy, right? You've got a pretty standard up and to the right growth chart, right? If you just saw that chart, you probably think, okay, the app's doing great, we're growing, everything's good. However, if we look at the chart on the right, this is the same monthly active users, but broken down into cohorts, showing the cohort retention. And what we can see is that these retention cohorts are trending to zero. So retention is really poor, actually, and it's getting worse. This is going to compound over time. This is called sometimes called a stacked retention graph. And this slowdown is really well visualized by this, what we call cohort decay. So each colored bar there on the right represents a new cohort trending down to zero. This suggests that all of the growth is actually coming from advertising spend, right? If you spend enough, acquiring enough new users every month, then it doesn't matter how leaky the bucket is, as long as you can keep pouring more water in at the top, then it looks healthy and it looks like the bucket's filling up. But the moment that you stop spending money, the moment you stop pouring water into that bucket, it's going to be empty soon enough, and that's exactly what this is showing. So basically, what I'm saying is, don't just look at MAU growth to give you an indicator of how healthy your product is growing. It's not a good indicator alone of sustainable growth. Sorry, I didn't switch it to the Korean slide early enough there. So here is what we call a cohort table. This is just another way of looking at retention. Maybe many of you have probably seen one of these already. It's just a graphical representation of the data that shows how different groups of users are retained over time. And to read a cohort table, you can look horizontally to follow, if you go across the table, you can see how one cohort of users who were installed on a particular date, how they're being retained over time. And if you look vertically, down a column, you can see how the retention trend is, how it's trending. So in other words, is it improving? Is it getting worse? Looking down the column, you can often see, typically you might look at that to see if you're improving the onboarding by looking at your day one retention. If it's increasing, probably you've made some good changes to the onboarding. Or maybe you're acquiring better types of users who are more suited to the app. It could mean that your marketing is more effective. But in any case, horizontally, how a given cohort is performing over time. Vertically, the trends between the cohorts. Okay, so another graph that you might want to look at, particularly when you're trying to define your strategy for re-engaging users, and that would be natural usage frequency. You want to think about, what is the reasonable expectation for usage of your product? How many days within a given month will the average user actually want to engage with your product? So, at SoundCloud, we asked this question, how often do we want a SoundCloud user to listen to a track, It's not about how much you want the user to use it, it's what can you reasonably expect based on, typically things like, if you're solving a problem for the user, how often are they going to encounter that problem, right? And that varies a lot. If you've got a document scanning app, then you have to, it's only going to be useful to a user when they want to scan a document. You can't really force them to use it more by sending them some push notifications. Hey, do you want to scan some documents today? Doesn't really work, right? So, but when they do want to scan a document, they're going to use your app because it's really valuable to them. Same with travel booking. You can't really make people book travel every day. So this idea of understanding what is the natural usage frequency is very important to make sure that you've got your messaging and engagement strategy for your users aligned with realistic expectations. So by creating a histogram like this one we created in Amplitude. We use Amplitude a lot, by the way. I know that they're a sponsor here, but genuinely makes our life a lot easier as consultants when our clients have Amplitude, because it's got a lot of great analytics features. So yeah, we can create these charts really easily. What we're looking at is how many days in a given month are users coming back, and we sort of plot that in terms of a frequency chart. And we look at what is the sort of the top end, how often are the most engaged users coming back, as well as at the bottom end, which is typically not very often at all. I mean, you want to like try to understand what is the average user, how often are they coming back. And a histogram like this gives you a good indication of like what can be a reasonable expectation of usage. Okay, I'm going to have quite a few graphs in this presentation because it's really engagement and retention is all about like looking at the data, understanding it, maybe drawing some hypotheses from it, and then seeing if you can improve the data. So we work very a lot with analytics, and then pair that with strategies to actually improve the numbers by interacting with users and trying to get better outcomes for these metrics. So next thing I want to advise you to do is segment your retention curves like crazy. Like break them down by anything that you can think of that might be an interesting segmentation variable. Some basic things that I would say always to look at would be things like looking at your acquisition source and campaign, seeing which channels are bringing you the most retained users. Break it down by like what actions they're taking within the app. I noticed actually earlier on there was a video running from like an Amplitude demo where it shows like graphing by like how many people did a certain action more than 3 times. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. You can break that down. You can see how retention differs depending on which users are taking which actions and how often they're taking them. And from this, you can really understand which are the actions which are highly correlated with higher retention. And then you can start to consider interactions with those users or interventions to try to make the non-retained users act more like the ones who are highly correlated with higher retention, right? So, for example, if you see that users are taking a certain action, let's say with SoundCloud, it was listening to a track was very highly correlated with retention. The more people listened, the more likely they were to come back. And so if you see like high correlation with a particular action, you want to maybe see if you can actually encourage people to actually take that action. So at SoundCloud, we did that through various interactions, including things like recommending more tracks that they might want to listen to. So it's not really rocket science, but one thing I want to call out is that correlation doesn't equal causality. So in other words, just because you see a certain acquisition channel or action that a user is taking is correlated with higher retention for those users, doesn't mean that you can push other users to do those things and they will automatically become as well retained as the users who did it organically. Usually we see something between the two. You can probably improve the retention a bit, but it's not going to be as good as the ones who did it organically, because typically they have a higher level of intent. So, as well as just looking at data in terms of the looking at analytics, you want to consider the ways that you can gather and leverage information from the user from the moment that you're able to collect it. So what we see here, I'm going to come back to this diagram in a minute, but it's just one way of envisaging the user life cycle. It's like you kind of onboarding people into what I call like a spin cycle of engagement. You want to kind of bring them in on that journey well, and then get them into the middle where they're kind of hopefully constantly being re-engaged and going round and round in this cycle, hopefully really enjoying the product and getting a lot of value from it. And eventually some users will churn out, they'll start to lapse, and you can hopefully re-engage some of those, bring them back into the cycle and get them really engaged again. So I call this the spin cycle of the user journey. We'll come back to it. But what I wanted to say is there's all the way through that, there's opportunities to gather valuable data about the user. From the moment that they're clicking on an advert to the moment that they churn out of the app. These data can come from a variety of sources. It could be attribution data from a platform like Airbridge, or from UTM parameters that you're passing in when, so you can see where they've come from. It can also be a lot of first-party data that you've collected from analytics, tracking events and actions that the user does within the app. But also don't be afraid to actually ask users for more information. Hit them up with surveys within the app. We find surveys to be incredibly valuable. Or little prompts, anything where you can get either explicitly or implicitly a better understanding of user behavior and user motivation you should collect it and then try to use that to make smarter interactions with the user. So here's an example of some user surveys that we've deployed for some of our clients. On the left, we have Burner, in the middle, Headspace, and on the right, Fishbrain. 3 very different kinds of apps, different categories. These kind of surveys always work. They always provide a way to actually personalize the user journey further. And users like being asked stuff because you're showing an interest in the user. You ask the user, what are you here for? What do you like? What problem are you trying to solve? You know, it gives you a very rich data point, which you can use to immediately start segmenting and personalizing those users' subsequent experience. And the user, just by receiving the survey and having a chance to answer it, also feels better because they feel like, oh, this app, these developers actually, they care about me and they're interested in my opinion, and they're going to make the product better because of my response. So yeah, we run surveys a lot for our clients. We run them usually like immediately the user installs the app. We will ask them, hey, what are you here for? What are you looking for from this app? So that we can start to align with their expectations. And we also fire surveys at various other points as well. Like particularly if we see that they're likely to churn, we want to also try to understand, what we can do to make them stay. And you can also actually use your acquisition data to actually already start to kind of customize your journeys even before the user gets into the app. So when I talk about a customer journey, the customer journey starts with the advert that they click on, or when they land in the App Store if they're discovering the app organically, right? With the advent of custom product pages from Apple and custom store listings from Google, it's definitely possible to actually start to customize. Even on the landing page, even in the App Store or the Play Store listing itself, you can start to customize and personalize based on the intent that the user is showing. So in other words, if a user clicks on an ad that is emphasizing a particular feature or benefit of the app, you can talk about that feature and benefit of the app and show that in your screenshots and talk about that in your app description before they've even installed the app. That's going to increase conversion in the app, but then you also ideally want to pass that information through into the first session so that you can start to customize the onboarding experience to also talk about these things. So I'm going to now talk a bit more about onboarding because it's such a critical part of the journey. And it's really about kind of creating a consistent messaging from the advert through the app stores into the first session into the app and hopefully beyond. Really, whatever promise you're making to the user that you're going to solve a certain problem or deliver a certain value, you need to remind them of that value proposition and be consistent about it in such a way that the user really feels like the app is for them and that the app that they're now installed and they're running is the same app that they wanted to install, and it's going to solve the problem that they were searching for a solution for in the App Store. And if you can align all of those things, then you're going to have much better early days retention. And what we see on this chart is that it's really important to have that early day retention because a lot of users churn within the first session. Basically, they'll never come back for session 2 if they didn't enjoy session 1. So a huge amount of users will churn within 24 hours of installing your app. And so it's really important that their first session is valuable and that they really get the feeling that this is the right app for them and that they made a good decision to download it. Because the cost for them of abandoning the app and going and finding something else is basically zero. So, as I mentioned, onboarding starts in the app stores, in the adverts already. You want to ensure that continuity of messaging and set the expectation already in your advert, continue that expectation in the app stores, and then continue it into the first experience within the app as well. So the first screen in the app should restate that value proposition that you already told them about in the App Store or the Play Store. Okay, so each of these apps does exactly that. They all restate the value proposition on that first screen. It's delivering continuity. From left to right there, we have Fastic, Evernote, and Dropbox. I think all of these are like really nice examples of onboarding done right. And I'm going to show you just a bit more deep dive on the Fastic onboarding right now. So some effective onboarding tactics. Make sure you have a clear statement of your product's value proposition that aligns with the acquisition. I think I've kind of labored that point enough. It's also really important to include some educational guidance on how to use the app and its core features. You can do this natively as part of the product onboarding. You can also experiment with in-app messages to see what features drive to actually drive people to take certain actions within the app. We do a lot of that using Braze to drive people to features that we see being highly correlated with later stage retention. And you can do that adaptively. So if people are discovering the features by themselves, then you don't necessarily need to send them the message. So we call that adaptive onboarding. And you can also, of course, use the onboarding process to actually collect more information about the user, which you can use to tailor the rest of their experience and also the messaging that they'll receive via email, push notifications, etc. So get some more preference information or some other information from them. Sorry, here's the Korean. So Fastic is interesting for a couple of ways. It has a fairly complex onboarding. Fastic's an intermittent fasting app, by the way. They do a great job of making the onboarding process fun. It's got cute animations. It's got really nice visual branding. And they ask a lot of questions from the user. And it also shows a progress bar to let people know how far through the onboarding they are, which is just as well because it's really long. It's about like 15 screens or something. Okay, so zooming in here, you can see that there's a bunch of stuff going on there. They collected a lot of information on some of those previous screens. They're requesting permissions for things like push, which is also a really good practice. If you don't collect these permissions in the first session, you won't be able to send them messages with push or email in the second session because you won't have the permission to message them. So ask that permission early. And then what they're doing, which is really smart, if you see the paywall there, which is the fourth one along, they're actually using already some of the information that they collected in the onboarding, in this case, the goal weight that the user wants to achieve, 65.2 kilograms. They're using that to personalize the paywall, which they're showing in that first session. It's also good to show people the paywall early, because most people who will subscribe will do it in the first session when they're at highest intent. And they'll definitely improve conversion by showing them their target weight on that paywall, because then they really feel like not just the product Fastic is for them, but also the subscription is for them, because it knows that they want to achieve this goal. That's a really nice conversion tactic. So I think Fastic is an example I really like to show of onboarding done very, very well. It also goes against some of the conventional wisdom that you should keep an onboarding short. It's actually super long, but they have an 80% completion rate at that onboarding process because it's fun, and they put a lot of work into making it really nice and interactive. It's almost like a little mini game. Okay, so a couple more drivers of retention and engagement. Community. Don't underestimate the power of community. If you've got loyal users and strong advocates for your app, they might even create their own fan sites or other offline or online communities. They might even have meetups. And you could be able to support them maybe with budget or special gifts for the super fans, or offers for the community members, treating them like VIPs in some way, or giving them early access to maybe early versions of the next version of your app. Invite them to be beta testers. Leverage these communities. They're your most loyal evangelists, and they can do a lot to help you grow, actually. And it also creates, of course, super high retention for folks that are in those communities. And so Clash of Clans does this really well. They've done a lot with both creating their own kind of places for users to gather, but also supporting third-party user communities like on Reddit, for example. My key advice here is to go out and engage with your community wherever it exists. Don't wait for them to write to customer support with a problem. Engage with them on Twitter or Reddit or wherever they are. And by doing proactive community engagement, you can turn problems and people complaining about your product or your app, your game, into opportunities, and you can turn these complainers into fans and ambassadors if you give them a positive interaction with your brand. SoundCloud did tons of community engagement with creators all over the world. It doesn't have to be expensive, but you could actually do, even organize offline events and things like this. So to wrap up, I want to show a few examples of like lifecycle marketing. At Phiture, we use a lot of we use customer engagement platforms like Braze an awful lot to influence the metrics. I said we look a lot at data to actually understand what's going on and to get a better feel for which metrics we want to move in order to increase engagement and retention. We also use customer engagement platforms to actually interact with users to try to move those metrics. So building out like lifecycle marketing programs that are event-driven, interactive, real-time, personalized, with channels such as push notifications, email, and in-app messaging, you can significantly increase user retention and hence get sustainable organic growth over the long term. It's important to consider the full life cycle for the user and also to understand their psychology, their needs and frustrations at every stage. And a lot of that is by talking to users and really getting a full understanding of how they're experiencing the product. Again, surveys, but also maybe reach out and talk to them, bring them into the office, have focus groups with them. Here's a couple of other examples. So some great tactics for e-commerce apps. So we just got like some push notifications here, kind of getting people back into the product when they've added something to their cart. So, sort of abandoned cart type things. They still work really, really well. And just also keeping people updated on like what the status of their order is. Or, of course, giving them recommendations of additional stuff they could buy. At Headspace, we did a lot of work to drive adoption of new features. They added a lot. They started out as just a meditation app, and then later they added things like getting off to sleep with sleep sounds, and they have all sorts of stuff. I think they even have recipes in there now, and exercise routines. So, of course, they wanted to drive not just the new users to these features, but also to educate existing users that these features were there. And that involves talking to those users through channels like push, email, in-app messaging, some examples that you see here. And we were able to drive a lot of uplift for Headspace in terms of feature adoption, simply by kind of pushing these features to the users at the right time in their user lifecycle. Here's a quick example from Hyperconnect. We were working with the Azar app for a while. It's important to iterate on your notifications. Rich push can be a great channel. It's just an example of like, I wanted to throw a Korean example in here. It's just like a copy iteration example. Now, one new CRM, speaking of CRM and customer engagement, one new channel which we found to be super effective, at least for some categories of app, it's live activities. So this is like something new released on iOS, where like certain things like, you've got delivery app, you've got like food being delivered, it gives you like a counter, a countdown. If you've got your Uber or your Kakao taxi is arriving, you can see how long it's going to take. So they're kind of like something between a widget and a push notification. It's kind of like a live widget, basically. These things are actually working very well for some of our clients when they want to, because it's kind of a new channel and it has like strong real estate on the front page of the, the front screen of the app. The users really pay attention to it. So it's a great way to drive engagement, but only with certain types of apps. So you have to really think creatively about whether this can apply to your app. And finally, because I'm almost out of time, I want to get on to re-engagement. Now, re-engagement of lapsed users is pretty tough. You shouldn't wait until they're a month or 2 months churned, because it's usually too late by then. Okay. At SoundCloud, we were able to re-engage users pretty effectively. We had kind of different levels of re-engagement. So we had like 2 days, 5 days, and 10 days inactive. And then the messaging that we showed them basically was dependent on how active they had been beforehand. Like if we knew that they had listened to a track already, we would send something very personalized. If we didn't know, so in this case, they're unactivated users. So these examples are basically trying to give them something to get started. So these are not even really like churned users, they're more like unactivated users. If they listen to a track already, which is what we see here, we would basically, on the same cadence, 2, 5, and 10 days inactive, we would be able to personalize based on the last track that they listened to. And we found that was much more effective to re-engage them because we were able to tell them, hey, come back and listen to more Kanye West. If they were listening to Kanye West the last time they were engaged, that worked really well. And yeah, basically there's a couple more variants of this, which I'm just going to kind of scroll through because I want to get to the end of the presentation. There we go. Great. Yeah, so just finally about Phiture. We help apps grow. We work with clients across all areas of the funnel, from App Store optimization, organic and paid marketing, through to engagement, retention, monetization, and support services like design and localization and data science and analytics. So if you want to learn more about Phiture, you can come and find me later. I'll be at the booth or with my colleague Gene. Or you can add me on, oh, sorry, I should have, didn't leave the Korean up long enough. But anyway, if you want to find out more, please add me on LinkedIn or come by our booth. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation today. I hope you've learned something. If you want to discuss or ask any questions, come find me at the booth and I'll happily chat, or at the after party. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks again to Airbridge. 감사합니다. Thank you.